A little bit about the presidential debates. And this is going to start tomorrow. And this is going to be, Biden against Trump round two. And CNN's been promoting it and people are talking about it. How is Biden preparing? How is Trump preparing? Biden seems to be at Camp David in lockdown with his big staff, and they're running through scenarios and asking him questions. Trump is going to these rallies and freelancing and riffing and throwing out trial balloons and accusing Biden of going to be on some kind of drugs to stimulate him through the debate. Just ridiculous. Never mind the fact that Trump is probably on drugs himself as he's going through this whole thing. But at any rate, there's a big debate and it's tomorrow. And it's very interesting because this is the first time that I can recall that we've had the Republican and Democratic candidates debating before their conventions, before they're actually nominees. They're just the presumed nominee and they're already having a debate. And the question was, were they going to include Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in this? And the answer is no. They said he didn't qualify. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But the presidential debates for me has always been a huge pet peeve of mine, because if you look around, there are more people that are independent than Republican or Democrat. So when I look at that stage and I see a Republican and a Democrat, I say to myself, well, which guy is representing or which woman is representing the independents? Neither one of them are. Now, according to a Gallup proposal or Gallup poll, they said, never mind that in 2022, 43% of U.S. adults identified as independents, 27% as Republican, 27% as Democrats. Independents first outnumbered supporters of both major political parties in 1991. Wow, that's over 30 years ago. And have continued to do so since then, except in several years between 2004 and 2008. So here we go, another round of debates. People don't like either candidate. I mean, most voters don't want either one of them. And you can count me in that group. Of course, the hardcore Trump supporters love Trump. The Biden supporters are out there loving Biden. Now, in my opinion, they hate the other guy more than they love their own guy. But there's still no independent, candidate. And so it's like, we live in America. And I made another meme that I've been sharing on Twitter. And here it goes. It's America, the land of unlimited options, except in presidential debates. I mean, think about that. You go to the grocery store, you're overwhelmed with choices. You go buy a car, all these different manufacturers, makes, models, different accessories. You go buy clothing in different colors, different styles. When we get to the presidential debate, it's one of two guys. It's a Republican or a Democrat. It's like Coke or Pepsi. Pick one. Pick one of them. And if you don't pick one of them, you're wasting your vote, which is the biggest load of malarkey of all time. Because in my opinion, I don't support either one of them. So if I were to vote for either one of them, I would be violating my own principles and thus throwing away my vote. But the thing with the debates that's concerning to me is that if you're not on the stage on the debate, then you're not taken seriously as a candidate. And the media will largely ignore you. There'll be a lot less conversation, amongst the people about candidates that are not qualified for the debate. And then it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy that they can't win, and why waste our time? Even though more people are independent than Republican or Democrat, even though people are upset with both candidates, even though people want a major change in direction in our country, no matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House. So look back on the debates. I went through this history. And remember, we had the Nixon-Kennedy debates in the 60s, and that was before I was born. And I know the debates kind of went dark for a while. And if I recall, I think they were resurrected in 76. And I think it was the League of Women Voters that ran those debates, which is great. And I remember in 1980, there was a third person, John Anderson. Remember, there was Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. And then there was John Anderson, who was like a really hardcore religious conservative. And in the first debate, it was Reagan against John Anderson. And Carter chose not to attend, which I'd have to go back and look at that. That's surprising to me but he wasn't there. And then for the second debate, it was Reagan against Carter, and John Anderson was not invited. But and I think that was a debate where Reagan asked the question, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" Which was a really compelling argument. And I think that's one of the reasons he won. So you had Reagan and Carter and a little bit of John Anderson in 1980. Then you had Reagan and Mondale in 84, which was when Reagan made that other quip, about I'm not going to exploit the youth and inexperience of my opponent, Walter Mondale, kind of making fun of his own age. And by the way, I think at that time, Ronald Reagan was in his 60s. And look what we got now. We got Trump, who's 70, what, 8? I think it's 78. His birthday was just this month. And then Biden is 81, I think. And they called Reagan too old when he was in his 60s. Okay, then you had 1988, which was an interesting time in the presidential debate. That was Bush against Dukakis. And that's when they got rid of the League of Women Voters. And the League of Women Voters, he thought would be a fairly neutral, nonpartisan, reasonably objective group that could run the debate, to not show any preference either way. Well, the problem was that the Republican and Democratic nominees didn't like the debate, didn't like the format. They were upset about who talked first and how tall the podium is and all these details that they wanted to manipulate the system to their benefit. It got to the point where the League of Women Voters said, screw you, we're not going to do this anymore. And they abandoned the debate. And they created the Commission on Presidential Debates in 1988 for Bush and Dukakis, which, by the way, is sponsored by all of these big time brands in corporate America. So essentially, you've got corporate America running the debates, further, doubling down on this whole idea that, we have huge corporate influence in the way America is run. And that corporate influence is also creating barriers for independent candidates to get up on the stage. But then we had 92, and many people remember 1992 because that was the year of Ross Perot. So there was Clinton, there was George H.W. Bush, Bush Sr., and then there was Ross Perot. And, Ross Perot, again, you can judge each of these candidates as you see fit. Like anyone, most of these candidates are a mixed bag. I wasn't necessarily a big Ross Perot guy, although I liked a few of the things he was saying. But I was just excited that there was a third voice, that there was more diversity of discussion, that there were more options to choose from. Because if a candidate is not in that debate, they're essentially off the radar and instantly dismissed as a non-serious candidate. So we had Perot there. And remember in 92, it was really weird where Perot was this phenomenon and he, got all this support. And then he suddenly shut down his campaign. Remember that? And then it had something to do with threats to his daughter's wedding. And there was a lot of controversy and he left the race. And then he came back in at the last minute and he was able to get into the debates. And by the way, there were other candidates besides Perot. There was actually a candidate, Harry Brown, who was actually Harry Brown ran in 96. He was on the Libertarian Party, and Harry Brown was qualified on the ballot in 50 states. So was Perot, not just in 92, but even in 96. So then 96 rolls around, and the Republicans and Democrats who run the Commission on Presidential Debates said, oh, hey, we let Perot in. And I think you had to poll, again, I might not have the numbers quite right, but it was about 5% in certain national polls. And you remember, Perot was getting like 10 to 15%, and he had certain momentum. There were even some polls he was going a lot higher than that. So in 96, the Commission on Presidential Debates raised that threshold to, I think, 15%. And then suddenly, Ross Perot no longer qualified for the debate, and we were left with the 1996 debate of Bob Dole and Bill Clinton. Okay, then you get to 2000, and it's George W. Bush and Gore. You get to 2004, it's Bush and Kerry. 2008, Obama and McCain. Again, just two. 2012, Obama and Romney. 2016, Trump and Hillary Clinton. 2020, Trump Biden. 2024, Trump Biden version 2. The rematch. So this bugs me a lot that the system is rigged this way. Trump says, oh, the debates are going to be rigged. And he's right. but they're rigged in his favor by keeping competitors out. And you'll hear him up on the stage riffing. He'll say, "Oh yeah, Bobby Kennedy, we could invite him, but he's not really doing that good in the polls, and yada yada." He doesn't want Kennedy on the stage. Biden certainly doesn't want Kennedy on the stage. They want the focus to be on them and against the other guy, and they just want it to be a binary choice. Even though on your ballot, it's not a binary choice. Here in the state of California, we should have at least 3, hopefully more candidates in the general election on November 5th on the ballot. There'll be the Republican nominee, the Democratic nominee, and there should be third parties. And RFK, I'm thinking he might qualify in California. I don't know the status on that. So why did they exclude Robert F. Kennedy from the debate? All right. Now, one of the criteria they said is that you have not qualified to be on enough ballots to achieve 270 electoral votes, which is the minimum required to win. Now, in general, I like that criteria because, polls are kind of, subjective in a lot of ways. But if you're on the ballot in enough states to get 270 electoral college votes, that means you have quite a bit of support in all those states. And to me, that should be the minimum threshold to be on the debate. Never mind the fact that Perot qualified on 50 ballots and Harry Brown qualified on 50 ballots in 1996. They were excluded. But now they said, okay, well, you don't have to be on all the ballots. Just get to the 270. Well, they said, well, RFK hadn't qualified. Never mind the fact that Trump and Biden haven't qualified for the ballot either. Neither one of them is the nominee of their party. They haven't had the Republican National Convention or the Democratic National Convention when they get their official nomination and they pick the vice president and they have the platform and everything. Right now, they're the presumed nominee. So the very criteria that they're limiting RFK to get in the debate, they themselves don't qualify. In fact, if you look at the criteria, only Robert F. Kennedy qualifies. Trump and Biden don't qualify at all. Now, they went a bit further and they said, actually, when it comes to the ballot qualification, this, again, I've talked about this in previous episodes. Ballot access rules by state vary widely. And in so many cases, they make it easy for Republicans and Democrats to qualify on the ballot and extraordinarily difficult for third parties and independents to get on the ballot. Often there are greater numbers of signatures and other, minimum thresholds that have to be met. And that criteria makes it, they create a chicken and egg situation where you can't qualify unless you reach certain minimum criteria. But then if you're not on the debate stage, if you're not really being discussed as part of the selection process, then you'll never get rankings in the polls. And so the news media and the election system kind of reinforce each other so that we only usually get these two candidates. But RFK had actually collected enough signatures in enough states to qualify, but those signatures are sitting at various state Secretary of State offices waiting to be approved, to be verified. But the signatures have been turned in. And I don't know the numbers, but certainly, they're going to collect more signatures than the minimum threshold because they find ways to disqualify certain signatures. So RFK and his ground team, as an independent candidate without the benefit of a political party machine, is qualifying on ballots, has submitted paperwork to be on enough ballots to get 270 electoral college votes, yet he's excluded, even though Biden and Trump aren't on the ballot either, because neither one of them is the nominee of their party. Now, it went even further because they say, well, you've got to be at least 15% in certain polls. And in certain polls, RFK was at 15% or more. There were other polls he was at 15% or more, but the people running the debates, which is essentially the Republican and Democratic parties, which, by the way, are corporations, they said that these polls don't count. Only these polls count. And so even though RFK was qualified in some of the polls that count, he was qualified in polls that supposedly didn't count. And then even amongst the polls that did count, when the poll question went out, a lot of times there were only two choices that were given to the poll responder. They said, who do you support, Trump or Biden? They don't even ask if you support RFK or some other candidate. So how in the hell can he get enough support in a poll if he's not even included in the question of the poll? But that's what we're left with. Now we're stuck with these two decrepit old guys with horrible policies. And here we go again. So I'll watch the debate. I always enjoy watching the debate. A lot of times I'll live stream, or excuse me, live tweet the debate on Twitter or X, because it's amazing watching it. It's entertainment value that's off the charts. It's interesting to me, and there are lies and propaganda that are being thrown around that have to be called out for the BS that it is. Now, this particular debate, I guess one of the big things is there's no audience, no live audience, and Trump loves playing to the live audience, and their microphones are going to get cut off in the time frame that they're allowed to speak, which generally speaking, I think is a good thing. Of course, I think the mic cutoff thing may actually work for Trump, because remember, he was the one that was going over the clock last time and talking and interrupting Biden all throughout his presentation. And, again, I'm no Biden supporter, but Trump was an ass in the previous debates, the two of the three that he chose to participate in. And that's not a presidential debate. That's not a discussion of ideas. It just became like a street fight, like a brawl. And it was insane. So I'm very curious to see about the decorum here. But more importantly, I want to see what kind of questions they get. And a lot of times the questions that are asked are a lot of these hot button cultural issues, but we don't really get a whole lot into policies, foreign policy, economic policy, and some of those details. And I want to hear more of that. I still haven't decided who I'm going to vote for. It's definitely not Biden. It's definitely not Trump. And it's almost definitely not RFK. But we're going to see how this whole thing plays out. So what do you think of the presidential debates? Are you going to be watching? Do you have a thought on, should RFK be there? Should we open these up to independent and third-party candidates all the time? Do you see that the system is rigged to benefit Republicans and Democrats, or do you think it's a fair and open process? By the way, did you know that I think it's in the state of, it was either New Jersey or Maryland, that the Democratic Party is suing RFK to have his name removed from the ballot? Now, again, this is just crazy, because from our Democratic friends are always talking about, democracy is so important. We have to protect democracy. And they get upset about voter suppression. Those evil Republicans are trying to take away the right to vote. Well, these parties keep candidates off the ballot by setting higher requirements to qualify. And then when they do qualify, they're being sued, in this case by the Democratic National Committee against RFK. So the whole thing, if you look at it from this perspective, it's just nuts. And it is the exact opposite of a fair and open process. But that's what we're going to be dealing with these debates.